The late months of 2013 marked a period of profound transition for the interactive entertainment industry, as the arrival of 8th-generation home consoles promised to render the previous 7 years of technological development obsolete overnight. As consumers eagerly anticipated the launch of the PlayStation 4, software developers were actively abandoning the aging architectures of the past to embrace the unified, developer-friendly memory pools of the future. Yet amid this massive industry migration, Polyphony Digital made the audacious decision to release Gran Turismo 6 exclusively for the PlayStation 3. By doing so, the studio pinned the reputation of its flagship racing simulation franchise onto a console that most technical analysts believed had been pushed to its absolute physical limits years prior. The prevailing consensus was that any attempt to extract further graphical or physical fidelity from the machine would result in catastrophic frame rate degradation, as modern rendering engines were simply too demanding for a platform conceived in the mid-2000s. The foundational obstacle to achieving next-generation performance on the PlayStation 3 was its highly rigid, asymmetrical split memory architecture. Unlike modern gaming systems that utilize a unified memory pool shared seamlessly between computational components, the console divided its microscopic 512 megabytes of total RAM into two strictly isolated blocks: 256 megabytes of XDR system memory and 256 megabytes of GDDR3 video memory allocated to the RSX Reality Synthesizer graphics processing unit. This meant that the graphics card was perpetually choked by a severe VRAM bottleneck when handling high-resolution texture maps, complex geometry data, and advanced post-processing effects simultaneously. If a development team attempted to push past the 256 megabyte threshold of the video memory, the system was forced to pull data across a narrow hardware bus, creating massive latency penalties that choked rendering pipelines and induced severe stuttering during complex gameplay sequences. To dismantle this technological barrier, Polyphony Digital bypassed traditional rendering protocols entirely and focused their efforts on weaponizing the console's unorthodox central processing unit, the Cell broadband engine. The layout of this chip differed fundamentally from standard multi-core processors, consisting of a single primary PowerPC processing element known as the PPU and a cluster of specialized coprocessors called synergistic processing elements, or SPUs, connected by an incredibly fast internal communication highway called the Element Interconnect Bus. While one SPU was permanently disabled during manufacturing to improve factory yields, and another was reserved exclusively for the console's operating system, the remaining 6 SPUs represented an enormous reservoir of raw, untapped mathematical power.
However, because each SPU operated with its own tiny, isolated 256 kilobyte local store instead of a traditional shared cache, programming for them required developers to manually coordinate complex memory flow controller direct memory access transfers. Because this architecture carried a notoriously steep learning curve, the vast majority of cross-platform developers left the SPUs largely idling, treating them merely as auxiliary processors for basic audio decoding or compressed file loading. As illustrated in the hardware diagram, the unique structural separation between the PPU and the independent SPU blocks meant that standard sequential coding models were completely ineffective. Polyphony Digital realized that the only way to alleviate the processing strain on the underpowered RSX graphics chip was to transform these specialized computing cores into a highly parallelized software graphics pipeline. They engineered an intricate low-level system that intercepted the geometric vertex data and dynamic lighting calculations before they could ever reach the video memory pool. By writing hand-optimized assembly code specifically tailored for the SPUs, the programmers forced these raw computational units to operate as high-speed rasterizers and geometric engines. The SPUs processed the heavy mathematical lifting of calculating vertex shifts, skeletal orientations, and dynamic shadow volumes in perfect parallel synchronization, transmitting the highly compressed pre-calculated coordinates across the element interconnect bus directly to the GPU for final pixel output. This complete inversion of standard hardware roles provided the computational headroom necessary for Polyphony Digital to introduce real-time adaptive tessellation, a visual technique that was considered impossible on 7th-generation home consoles. In traditional 3D graphics, a character model or vehicle possesses a fixed number of polygons, regardless of how close it is to the game's virtual camera lens, leading to visible, jagged geometric edges when objects appear close to the screen. Real-time adaptive tessellation resolves this aesthetic limitation by dynamically subdividing flat polygons into an exponentially higher concentration of smaller organic geometric structures on the fly as an object approaches the viewer. By shifting this staggering mathematical burden off the struggling RSX GPU and distributing it evenly across the parallel architecture of the cell processors' SPUs, the engine smoothly increased the visual fidelity of the tracks and the 1200 included vehicles without saturating the system memory. The measurable impact of this low-level hardware optimization becomes clear when evaluating the real-time performance and environmental fidelity achieved on track compared to earlier titles. By transforming the cell processor into a secondary graphics engine, the studio was able to implement a comprehensive environmental simulation that went far beyond basic visual improvements, introducing dynamic night and day cycles alongside shifting weather patterns that fundamentally altered the physics of track surfaces.
The engine calculated the real-time deformation of vehicle bodywork, responsive aerodynamic drag coefficients that changed depending on drafting distances, and complex lighting calculations that accurately cast shadows from moving headlight beams onto undulating track geometry. Furthermore, the development team integrated an astrometric simulation engine that mapped the precise positioning of star constellations, planetary trajectories, and moonlight angles based on the geographical coordinates and historical dates of real-world racing circuits. Ultimately, the technical architecture of Gran Turismo 6 serves as a definitive testament to the power of pure software engineering over raw physical specifications, illustrating that a deep understanding of low-level hardware can effectively shatter official development limitations. By refusing to comply with the conventional boundaries of the PlayStation 3's split memory layout, Polyphony Digital weaponized a notoriously difficult CPU to perform complex graphical work traditionally reserved for dedicated video hardware. Their achievement proved that the operational lifespan and visual potential of a computational platform are not strictly defined by the numbers printed on a factory specification sheet, but are instead defined by the willingness of engineers to descend to the bare metal and write directly to the silicon.